Guatemala is one of those countries whose size can be misleading. On a map, it occupies a relatively compact space in northern Central America, but within that space are volcanic highlands, tropical forests, Caribbean and Pacific coasts, ancient cities, modern urban sprawl, and some of the most important indigenous history in the Americas. Officially known as the Republic of Guatemala, it is bordered by Mexico to the north and west, Belize to the northeast, Honduras to the east, and El Salvador to the southeast. To the south lies the Pacific Ocean, while the Gulf of Honduras gives the country access to the Caribbean side of the region. This position has made Guatemala a crossroads, between North and Central America, between ocean routes, between indigenous civilizations and colonial empires, and between deep natural wealth and persistent social inequality. Geography is central to understanding Guatemala. The country is not a single landscape, but a collection of dramatically different zones packed together. The southern coast faces the Pacific and includes fertile lowlands shaped by volcanic soils. Farther inland, the highlands rise into mountains and volcanoes, creating cooler climates and valleys where many communities have lived for centuries. To the north, the Petén region is dominated by tropical forest and lowland plains, an area tied closely to the ancient Maya world. This variety has influenced everything from settlement patterns to agriculture, trade, culture, and political power. It also helps explain why Guatemala is so biologically rich. Different elevations and climates create habitats for many species, including endemic plants and animals found nowhere else. Long before the modern state existed, the territory of Guatemala was part of the core area of the Maya civilization. The Maya world extended across Mesoamerica, but Guatemala was especially important because it contained major cities, ceremonial centers, trade routes, and agricultural zones. In the lowlands, great urban centers rose from the forest, with temples, plazas, palaces, and carved monuments. In the highlands, communities developed their own political and cultural traditions, connected to wider Maya networks but rooted in local identities. The Maya were not a single unified empire, they were a civilization made up of many city-states, languages, rulers, alliances, and rivalries. Their achievements in architecture, astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, and writing remain one of the defining legacies of the Americas. The arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century transformed the region violently and permanently. Most of what is now Guatemala was conquered and brought into the Spanish imperial system, becoming part of the broader viceroyalty of New Spain. Spanish rule imposed new political authorities, religious institutions, land systems, and labor demands. Indigenous communities faced disease, warfare, displacement, forced conversion, and exploitation, but they did not disappear. Instead, Maya peoples adapted, resisted, preserved languages and traditions, and reshaped colonial society from within. This colonial period created lasting divisions over land, ethnicity, class, and power. Many of Guatemala's later conflicts cannot be understood without recognizing how colonial structures concentrated wealth while marginalizing large indigenous populations. Guatemala became independent from Spain and Mexico in 1821, but independence did not immediately create stability. From 1823 to 1841, it was part of the Federal Republic of Central America, a short-lived political union that included several of today's Central American countries. The federation struggled with regional rivalries, ideological conflict, and disputes over authority. When it collapsed, Guatemala emerged as its own republic, but the 19th century was marked by instability and civil strife. Liberal and conservative factions competed over the role of the church, land ownership, trade, and modernization. As coffee and other export crops became more important, land became even more concentrated. The state often favored elites and export interests, while rural and indigenous communities bore the costs. In the early 20th century, Guatemala was ruled by a series of authoritarian leaders, many of whom had support from the United States or were aligned with U.S. economic interests. This period was shaped by plantation agriculture, foreign investment, and a political system that limited democratic participation. The United Fruit Company became especially influential in Guatemala's economy and infrastructure, owning land and controlling important transport networks. Dictatorship offered stability for elites and foreign investors, but it often meant repression for workers, peasants, and political opponents. Under Jorge Ubico, who ruled from 1931 to 1944, the state was highly authoritarian. Labor was tightly controlled, dissent was suppressed, and rural communities faced harsh conditions. Yet opposition gradually grew among students, workers, teachers, and military officers who wanted reform. In 1944, Jorge Ubico was overthrown by a pro-democratic military coup, beginning what is often called Guatemala's 10 Years of Spring. This decade-long revolution brought elected governments and ambitious reforms. Leaders sought to expand education, protect labor rights, modernize the economy, and reduce extreme inequality. One of the most important efforts involved land reform, aimed at redistributing unused large estates to landless peasants. For many Guatemalans, especially rural workers, this represented a real chance to challenge the old order. But for conservative elites, parts of the military, and foreign companies with large landholdings, the reforms appeared threatening. During the Cold War, social reform in Latin America was often interpreted through the lens of anti-communism, and Guatemala soon became a flashpoint. In 1954, a U.S.-backed military coup ended the revolutionary period and installed a dictatorship. The coup was justified publicly as an effort to stop communist influence, but it also protected political and economic interests threatened by reform. Its consequences were enormous. Democratic openings closed, many reforms were reversed, and political repression intensified. Instead of resolving Guatemala's social tensions, the coup deepened them. It convinced many opponents of the government that peaceful reform was no longer possible. Over the following years, distrust between the state, the military, rural communities, and leftist organizers increased. This breakdown helped set the stage for one of the longest and most devastating conflicts in Latin American history, the Guatemalan Civil War. From 1960 to 1996, Guatemala endured a bloody civil war between the U.S.-backed government and leftist rebel groups, some of which were supported by the Soviet Union and Cuba in the wider Cold War context. But describing the war only as a Cold War conflict misses its deeper roots. The war grew out of land inequality, repression, racism, poverty, and the exclusion of indigenous communities from political power. The Guatemalan military carried out brutal counterinsurgency campaigns, especially in rural areas where Maya communities were often accused of supporting rebels. The violence included massacres, disappearances, torture, and scorched earth operations. United Nations-backed truth efforts later documented genocidal massacres against Maya populations. The war left deep wounds that still shape Guatemalan society today. Peace came formally in 1996 through accords negotiated with the help of the United Nations. These agreements ended the armed conflict and promised reforms related to human rights, indigenous recognition, demilitarization, and democratic governance. Since then, Guatemala has held successive democratic elections and experienced periods of economic growth. But peace did not automatically erase the legacy of war. Many survivors still seek justice, land disputes remain unresolved, and trust in institutions has often been weak. Corruption and impunity have continued to challenge the political system. Democracy exists, but it operates in a society still shaped by inequality, trauma, and uneven access to opportunity. Guatemala's post-war story is therefore not only about recovery, but about the difficult work of building institutions after decades of violence. Today, Guatemala is the most populous country in Central America, with an estimated population of around 17.6 million. It is also the fourth most populous country in North America and one of the largest populations in the Americas overall. The capital, Guatemala City, is the country's largest city and one of the most important urban centers in the region. Its metropolitan area is the most populous in Central America, concentrating political power, business, infrastructure, universities, and media. But the country remains socially and culturally diverse far beyond the capital. Many indigenous communities continue to speak Maya languages and maintain distinct traditions, forms of dress, religious practices, and local identities. This diversity is one of Guatemala's great strengths, even as indigenous communities often face disproportionate poverty and exclusion. Guatemala's economy benefits from export goods, agriculture, textiles, remittances, tourism, and services. Its landscapes and heritage sites attract travelers, while its farms produce goods for both domestic use and international markets. Yet economic potential is unevenly shared. Around a quarter of the population, about 4.6 million people, face food insecurity. Poverty remains widespread, especially in rural and indigenous areas. Other major challenges include crime, corruption, drug trafficking, and civil instability. These problems are interconnected. Weak institutions make corruption harder to fight, poverty increases vulnerability, and organized crime can exploit gaps in state authority. At the same time, millions of Guatemalans sustain families through work at home and abroad, and civil society groups continue to push for accountability, development, and rights. Guatemala's story is one of extraordinary depth and difficult contradictions. It is the heartland of great Maya achievements, a country of volcanoes, forests, coastlines, and biodiversity, and a society with powerful cultural resilience. It is also a country marked by conquest, inequality, dictatorship, intervention, civil war, and ongoing struggles with poverty and governance. To understand Guatemala is to see how geography, history, and power overlap, how fertile land can create wealth but also conflict, how ancient cultures can survive conquest, and how democratic hopes can be interrupted and revived. Guatemala is not defined only by its hardships or only by its beauty. It is defined by the tension between them, and by the people who continue shaping its future. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.